When I arrived in Pune in 2017, the messages started straight away. The Australian setup was trying to get the call out to the press instantly. Look at this wicket. It's going to rag. How could we possibly win this match? A few days later, we had lived through Matt Renshaw almost shitting himself on a cricket field and Australia somehow beating India. At that stage, it was the first loss for India at home in 5 years. Although Australia had prepared for that tour well and had a Steve Smith wonder knock, no one really thought they were a chance of an upset, especially with the Indian spinners who usually took control in such situations. But India's problem in that match was they made a wicket that spun so far, it turned, pun intended, lesser spinners deadly. In that match, the leading bowler wasn't Ravi Jadeja, R. Ashwin, or even Nathan Lyon. It was Steve O'Keefe. India made a wicket so extreme that instead of giving them an advantage, it turned, pun intended, the match into a shootout. And it was India who got shot.
As a cricket journalist, I would travel sometimes up to 200 days a year. I loved watching cricket games. I loved going to new countries. It was an absolute dream. But there was one thing I hated more than anything else about it, and it was this little pin. The thing that I need to change my SIM card in every new country. The absolute worst thing about this pin and SIM cards is when I was traveling to the West Indies, of having to arrive in every new island or country and having to work out if I could still find this pin and then line up and get my SIM card in every single airport. Well, now we have the answer thanks to Sally. They can make it so you never have to worry about this nonsense ever again. They use an eSIM app that once you install once, it is easy, simple, and cheap. Oh, and it works in more than 160 countries. And you can throw these pins away forever because now you just need to download the Sally app before your trip. And if you do it with our code, Good Areas, you get an exclusive 15% discount on Sally eSIM data plans. So before your next holiday or work trip or any time you have to travel to another country, download the Sally app and use the code Good Areas, all one word, at checkout, and you can travel like a pro with Sally.
Now, we know that India won a lot of tests, and most of them pretty easily. So this idea of having raging turners was also very good for their spinners. And not just in the obvious ways. Indian spinners in the old days bowled so many overs. Bisham Bedi almost bowled 60 overs per match at home. Vinu Mankad and Anil Kumble were over 55 a game, with Prajan Oja and Harbhajan Singh just under that mark. R. Ashwin is 10 overs below 55. And Ravi Jadeja, he barely bowls more than 40. So it worked, right? They got more overs overall out of their greatest spin bowling pair, and they still won like a whole bunch of matches. But every now and again, Tom Hartley, Mitch Santner, and Steve O'Keefe would outbowl the world's two best spinners. Was it worth it? They won 18 consecutive test series. Even with the occasional embarrassment of an Ajaz Patel moment, it worked really well. But India did all that from a position of strength. They had not only two great spinners, but both of them could bat, and a lineup with players who played the turning ball brilliantly, or at least they did until the wickets actually ruined that as well. That is the complete opposite of why Pakistan has chosen these wickets. Their plan came from a string of embarrassing losses and just mind-numbing draws. Losing to Bangladesh meant that they had struggled on flat wickets and lost on seaming ones. Add in their loss in the first test against England, which was perhaps the most brutal of all the ones they lost, scoring 500 in the first innings and still losing their trousers. So they decided that spin, and not just normal spin, but savage spin, was the way to go. And when you've tried everything else, I suppose you're right. So they went all in on a reused wicket. There was a subtle way to do it, but Pakistan took a blowtorch to pitch curation. They used a potential 14-day pitch, although the plan was never really to let the game go that far. And it worked. They turned around a series from 0-1 to 2-1. That's a remarkable comeback. And their next game at home was against West Indies, and they won that as well. This means after going all in on savage spin, they won 3 straight tests. That's the plan, right? After losing so many games or just looking incredibly toothless, they found venom. It also gave us 2 extraordinary heroes. Sajid Khan and Naman Ali are like 2 men who work in adjacent work cubicles of lower middle management. The fun one with the jazzy socks and the bow ties, with the other guy who works really diligently at his job while solving samurai Sudoku like on the side. Obviously, Sajid Khan and Naman Ali are not Ashwin and Jadeja. But they're also not Jack Leach and Shoaib Bashir. So going up against England with this idea, especially with the batters to back it up, made some sense. The West Indies, though, was more interesting. On paper, they had two spinners who could be very effective on turning wickets and some backup options if needed. However, their batting was poor. Where spin is concerned, they really struggle. Over the past 3 years, they averaged fewer than 10 runs per wicket compared to Pakistan against the turning ball. This is not a fair fight at all. If we look at their batting, you could argue that Tajuddin Chandrapal, Kyle Mayers, and Nkrumah Bonner are their best players of spin. None of them have played in these test series. And compare that to the locals' mastery of playing spin, and it's obviously a completely different world. Saud Shakil might be one of the best players of the turning ball around at the moment. The stats on the bowling suggest the two teams are roughly equal at spin. But that doesn't account for the fact that Pakistan recently took spin bowling a lot more seriously. But even if we assume that their spin bowling is evenly matched, their batting is so far from that. Pakistan's run differential per wicket against spin is significantly better than the West Indies. Now, this plan worked against England, and it made sense to try it again. However, even winning those two tests against England, it was clear that Pakistan were making wickets so random that any advantage they had could backfire on them. It didn't, but remember that England turned up for one kind of series, flat decks, and Pakistan played them in another one. You spin me right round, baby, right round. And it was a great comeback. But that advantage disappeared when the West Indies showed up, because everyone knew at that stage what kind of wickets would be made. Pakistan put their wickets in a greenhouse. That's a glaring signal of their intentions. In the first match, they got the best of the toss, and although the West Indies stayed competitive at times, Pakistan were better. At that point, Pakistan had won 3 on the trot, so it made sense to stick with that plan. And what are the chances Pakistan would have won 3 of their last 4 matches without going all in on this method? Here's the twist. It's also hard to see the West Indies even drawing this series without these kinds of wickets. As we move towards a World Test Championship style of cricket, it's a first-class points-based system, and we see all kinds of wackiness in the 4-day format all around the world. But tests used to be played with the intent of not losing. Now, of course, teams are willing to risk a lot to win. India calculated that they could win a lot of tests easily without burning out their 2 best spinners, and they were willing to take the odd embarrassing loss. Except for at the end when things got very dramatic. But Pakistan were in a dire position. So a 3-1 record in recent home games is a lot better than failing to win in the previous 11 home tests. So it's worth it, and it's dangerous. You might win matches you shouldn't, but you're also going to lose ones you probably should. With few home tests in a cycle, the stakes for every match are quite high. By making the results so random against a better side, I can see how that makes sense. Against a worse one, it just doesn't. If you make wickets this much of a coin toss in a sport that already has a coin toss, there's always a chance it could completely backfire. They can actually just choose when to greenhouse their wickets based on their opposition's strength, and not just the fact that it worked against England. Not every wicket has to be this full on. Because when it is, they might win matches that they would normally lose, but they also might lose matches that they might normally win. That's the Pune paradox, right? Is it worth it? Today, Pakistan might feel like it isn't. But a week ago, it felt pretty good. It took God and the demon to build international cricket. But don't tell Johnny Best that. 1882, Australia had played 1 test in England against the god W.G. Grace, and they sucked. So they were playing him again, and it was a tough wicket. But England was in front, so Australia was desperate for a 3rd innings lead. At number 8 was young all-rounder Sammy Jones. After a routine single, he walks down to do some gardening on the pitch. Grace whips off the bails and appeals. The ball wasn't dead, Jones was run out. The Australians were furious. In fact, some of the English players were also furious. But what Grace said went, and the umpires had already given it. Next in was Fred Spofforth. He was known as the demon fast bowler. He was furious, and he let England know exactly what was coming next, which was maiden. There's 12 maidens. I can't count them all. England only needed 85 to win. W.G. Grace made 32. England only 77. That was the test where the Ashes began. Buy my book, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire, on Amazon today.